Dolores, here we are in October of 2018, just a few days away from the, it's actually the 19th Chaucer Mass, isn't it? Because we started in 2000, so you have to add one to the year. The 19th Chaucer Mass, which we started here at Our Lady of the Assumption at your request and at my desire to maybe make it go public rather than private.
Absolutely.
We decided to have a Mass in the church, or maybe I decided for Dolores to have a Mass in the church, and she was kind enough to go along with it, and it's just become an annual event ever since then.
Well, it was very popular. People enjoyed it.
It was popular. People enjoyed it.
And of course, it's what Chaucer asked for.
Tell us about that.
Well, at the end of the Canterbury Tales, one of the last things he says is, "You who are reading this, pray for me." And that means a lot of people.
That means a lot of people. So we are continuing to pray at the Chaucer Mass for the repose of the soul of Geoffrey Chaucer. And that has been kind of the focus, I think, that we have tried to make of it, rather than something that is publicity-oriented or...
Yes. People have asked me, like, do you dress up in costumes? And no. It's not a show. Yeah. It's a real Mass with beautiful music. We found very fine singers and recorder players, and it's lovely.
And we're not trying to imitate the liturgy of the 13th century,
right,
which is not the Tridentine liturgy. The Council of Trent didn't happen for a couple of hundred years later. But it certainly was a liturgy in very turbulent times, as we'll get to in a moment. But it was a liturgy that was very much in need of reform, because there were just a lot of barnacles, if you will, that were adhering to the liturgy, that had been added here, there, and everywhere, and everybody's kind of idea of what it should be. And it was not uniform in any sense, other than the fact that it was in Latin everywhere. But it was not really uniform. So, at any rate, we're not trying to go back in time to that liturgy. It is the contemporary liturgy with Latin responses, Latin motets, Latin music. The parts of the Mass are sung in Latin, but the rest of it is in English, and according to the Vatican II liturgy. Now, around the time that we were beginning those Masses, and probably a great stimulus to those Masses was the fact that you were still finishing your trilogy of books. That year, the third one was going to come out. And the first one was Chaucer's Host, upside down, turning upside down basically everything that we have always thought about who this host was in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. The second one is Pilgrim Chaucer, Center Stage. That's the one you call your naughty book.
Well, it's because of the story he... Oh.
No, that's okay. Because, go ahead.
It's a story he tells.
Yeah.
My publisher said it was the naughtiest book he'd ever published.
Okay. So if that doesn't sell it, nothing will. But that too is a very, very surprising, unique, and I think very logical take on how Chaucer himself appears in the Canterbury Tales. And then the big, thick one is about Chaucer's Pilgrims, the allegory.
Else.
That's everybody else. And the thing that holds this book together, the string, is seeing the heavenly bodies. The zodiac, the signs of the zodiac, and the planets being represented in the
Took a lot of research.
Took a lot of research. And more than that, a lot of really focused attention. It wasn't just pulling together stuff from here and there, but just how to pull it together.
Oh, well, each of his words is so important. You can't just kind of slough it off, or that one fits, so who cares?
Yeah.
I can remember the moment when I realized that the knight didn't have two identities, he had three. Oh my gosh. So the writers group I was going to, when I wrote that part, because they heard it all and understood it before it was published. And one of the men said, Dolores, you say, that is as it should be, that is as it should be, that is as it should be. Why do you say it 3 times? I says, because I just discovered there are 3 identities to this character. And yes.
And we're not going to go any further into that.
No.
Because it's all here.
Yeah.
And then 8 years later, you published basically the story of how you came to all of this and what has happened since the publication of these books, called, I love this word, ensnared by his words, my Chaucer obsession. And I just love that word, ensnared.
Yes.
That word, forgive me for the pun, but that word enthralls me.
Oh, okay.
Because enthrall means pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. But there was no putting it down. I couldn't get away from
You
it.
couldn't get away from it. So this is an absolutely fascinating story. Now, these books may not be easily available in bookstores any longer. There may still be some online at Amazon, running for anywhere from 99 cents to $400 or $500.
Yes.
That's an amazing thing. But they are all available online. If you go to Dolores's website, they are free and in a nice ebook format that you can read online or download in a number of different ebook formats, including PDF files.
And how is that possible, Father?
How is that possible? Well, through the wonders of modern technology, there is something called high definition scanning, high resolution scanning, and optical character reading, which basically translates all of this, except for the thorn and a few other
And
letters.
a dear friend willing to do the work to put them.
Yeah, okay, I did it. And so it's available on my website too. Dolores' website is celebratechaucer.com. My website is tomwelbers.net. And that will be in print along with this video. So we don't need to tell any more about these particular details. Well, there is one more. Who's Afraid of Middle English? This one you wrote 2 years after the big books.
Yes.
And it basically says, well, don't be too afraid of Middle English. Read Chaucer. In other words, in his original, don't read translations, because there is an Italian saying which applies even to bringing Chaucer's Middle English into modern English. The Italian saying is traduttore e traditore. Means the translator is a traitor.
Ah.
Okay. Because the translator has to, you make this point beautifully, the translator has to pick whatever to that translator is the most logical meaning for his or her purpose in making that translation. If you read it in the original, especially along with a comprehensive dictionary like the Middle English Dictionary, which she had to have in arduously collected collection of fascicles. Now it's freely available online in the University of Michigan website, but it gives all the different variations of meaning of different words that, just like we have plays on words in English, where a word may have a primary meaning and yet there is another meaning that just once the audience realizes it, they burst forth in laughing.
Or, may I mention
You may.
the most powerful
Well, you may.
second meaning? It's about the story of Topaz, and it comes to a certain point, and Topaz is saying, now if you want more, I will fond. We don't have that word anymore in English, but in the notes it'll say that means I will strive. Okay, but I looked up every word. I don't trust just the glossary. And when you look in the Middle English Dictionary, the first meaning of fond is to try the patience of God. Now, if that doesn't change, what happens? Just a few lines later, nothing will. And it is not even mentioned.
Right. And I think that is a, there are other things in the story of Sir Topaz that you, that we won't talk about here, but second meanings, that you may be very, very interested in, and that it's completely different from what any of the English translations have, and it's very, shall we say, insightful. Well, that having been said, it's not that if you've got a little help from an authoritative source like Middle English Dictionary, it's not that difficult to read Middle English. And you make an interesting point also, that don't get hung up on correct pronunciation of Middle English, or even don't get too hung up on consistent orthography, because spellings were often based on how somebody interpreted the sound of a word, and spellings were not at all necessarily consistent, even within the same author in the same
Oh, absolutely.
So
I quote a certain section where Chaucer spells the same word 3 different ways.
So don't get too hung up on those things. Read it not out loud, but read it as if it is something that you can make sense of without having to have a lot of angst. And then when you get to a puzzle, well, go to the University of Michigan website and look it up on their Middle English Dictionary. You won't have to take a trip to a university library.
Yeah,
Poor Dolores had to.
This book, you can understand everything it says. It may take a moment of, oh yes, that's what it says. But I say that.
What she does in here, and this is the one that is available on Kindle still, right?
Yes, yes.
Strangely enough. And you have no idea how that happened.
Right.
But this is a book of lists. You see the lists. And basically they give a words actually without translations, right?
Right.
Those are lists of words.
Every word in there
categorized
is
Middle English words without translations that you may need to look twice at, but you won't have to do more than just looking twice. And it's really fun to go through, especially on some of those sleepless nights. Anyway, so enough really about the research and the stories and your story that is in your books. I would just like to say, if you want to go further, look them up online, download them from the website. They're free. You don't have to pay any royalties or anything of that sort. There are 2 very interesting groups of people that I would like you to address in in some thought, maybe words of advice. One is the young people of our generation, the people who have in the last 10 years or so come into their own in our society and are the up and coming movers and shakers, really are the ones that we have for probably the last, I don't know, 15 or 20 years labeled as millennials. These are, let's say, mid-30s or mid-20s to mid-40s might be the outlying ages. Without going into any real analysis of what makes millennials unique, there's tons of that kind of research, but I thought it would be kind of an interesting thing to ask you, Dolores, what you, having 6 months ago or so celebrated your 90th birthday and spent about the last half of your life, because you were right around 45 when your Chaucer obsession sort of hit you, so that was right at the midpoint between then and now. What would you have to say now to your 45-year-old self embarking upon this adventure?
Well, the first thing that makes me different, and I figured it was to a great advantage, was that one, I was married to a college professor, so I was not in awe of him and his friends who were also professors. And two, I had raised a family. I was not your 18 or 20-year-old ingenue, wide-eyed and believing everything the professor said. So when I started to have questions about Chaucer, I was born a looker-upper, and I started to look things up, and I started to ask my professors, and they discouraged me, one and all, completely, but that didn't matter because I was finding out all kinds of things. So I guess one thing, I wouldn't do anything differently. If you are studying and you catch on to something, pursue it. And then, always, from a book on the art of research, says, now if you find that your idea doesn't hold water, drop it immediately. And I did get to one point. I had done a lot of research, and suddenly what I was looking at didn't make sense. And I really panicked for about 24 hours until I realized, no. There's something you're missing. Go back to the library, and I found the answer. So I could pursue it. And just persevere. That's all. I wouldn't have done anything differently. And I guess it fits in. Depends how much time you have, how much interest you have, how busy your life is. I happened to be widowed when I was in my 60s, and there was Chaucer just waiting for me, and he and I just went on a journey together. It's been wonderful.
Well put. Well put. In our conversation before beginning this recording, one of the points that was mentioned was, even to deal with the Middle English Dictionary, you had to take a journey to the college library and then, arduously get your own copy. Now, you can do the same thing in 30 seconds with a few keystrokes and a click of a mouse.
Okay, but I have to say, I'm a book person. It's not the same as when I had this volume and this volume and this one all spread on this big table at the library of the Claremont colleges. Having it online is not the same, not for me.
Now, why isn't it the same?
Well,
Because I think we need to hear that, because I very much agree, and everybody knows that I'm the techie priest
Yes.
that does most of my stuff online, even though I've got a wall full of bookshelves, and actually many of them are being read, but I'm very much an online researcher, and it's very easy, but there is a problem with that ease, isn't there?
It's ease, but you don't have the chance of the multiplicity. And I mean, I could have 10 books, and this footnote takes me to that one, and the next footnote takes me to that one. And you can't do that without a lot of foolishness on the screen in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
It just isn't as easy to read, as easy to switch. Like, I could close that one up and open that one up, and no.
Yeah. I'd sort of like also, in addition to that, I'd like to propose something that is almost the opposite. That it's too easy on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
In 5 minutes, I can gather a day's worth of research from the library. But in a day at the library, I am engaged in the act of processing that while I'm doing it, rather than just dot, 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 dot. So, in a way, I think the arduousness of physically dealing with words on paper and multiple texts in front of you introduces a sort of quality of time that produces depth. Whereas I think the online stuff, and I know I'm tempted this way all the time, can be very superficial. After a half hour, okay, I'm over and done with that, I know everything I need to know about that, now let's go on to something else. Well, that's not quite the way that ideas develop and mature. And particularly in the type of research you've done, it's a very creative bringing together of clues, of things that might not seem obvious together, and yet, oh yeah, that works, and that sounds very much like that would be in accord with the mentality of somebody who had to produce these things in the same way.
Your talking gave me time to remember the word. Another thing about it is, you look up a word and you've got the column and you're looking at this. What's going on over on this page that isn't on the screen? And one time I had worked on this word over and over, and there was just no finding a basis that made any real sense. And I'm looking over here, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this word, and that's the answer I've been looking for all along. Books, absolutely.
So, yet, let's face it, today's millennial generation researcher is probably going to do the majority of it online.
Yes. Oh, sure.
And benefit from the fact that you did not do all of this online. And I guess for our up-and-coming leaders in our world today, the people of influence and the people who live life in our world today, is there any particular thing that you would like to say that they could learn from going back to Chaucer and kind of immersing themselves, however they can, for a while in who and what Chaucer is and was? I know there are two books that are coming to my mind that are quite contemporary. One I think I mentioned already, Barbara Tuchman's A Distant Mirror. She doesn't really concentrate on Chaucer, but she's talking about his time. The other is, what's his name, Who Murdered Chaucer? Tommy.
Yes. The Man from Monty Python.
The Man from Monty Python, yeah, which I did read some time ago. I haven't gone back to it, but I think that he is telling a tale of intrigue in Chaucer's time that is probably pretty relevant to us in our time too.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was done really scientifically. He was serious about it.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what was your question?
My question is to kind of wrap up this little segment of talking to our younger generation of active participants in our society now. What do you think Chaucer can offer to them?
Well, of course, I have this problem with Chaucer because I can see a double meaning to what he's saying, and it is a very serious meaning, and people don't recognize it. And my feeling is, if there were people who took seriously that second meaning, it could change the way we look at medieval literature, and you have no idea what else you might find. Of course, that's going back. But again, as Robert Tushman points out, what's happening, the horrors and things back then are happening now. Aren't we ever going to learn? You would hope.
And probably exploring those double meanings, which were double meanings in part because they had to be hidden, or veiled at least, as much was in those days. Otherwise, you were even more at risk of losing your head.
And all your works would be destroyed.
And all your works would be destroyed.
So all your attempts would come to naught.
And that was a problem with Chaucer too, because you point out that we don't have any original manuscripts, right?
Yes. And nobody talks about that.
And not only don't we have original manuscripts, but we have, what is the oldest one? It's about a generation after he lived, wasn't it? The earliest manuscript.
So they must.
So his stuff was hunted down and tracked down and destroyed.
Yes. Somebody saved it. Somebody copied it beautifully. And why didn't they keep the original?
Yeah.
We don't know.
We don't
And
know.
when I was in school, nobody ever mentioned that. It was a shock to me when I realized it.
And to me, that says something about how we navigate in this era where communication is far more instantaneous, but news can be falsified.
Yes.
And the false news, the fake news, is the one that gets that gets out there, while the real thing is hidden for some future researcher, possibly. And that's a kind of a dreadful thing within our happening within our society.
Yes.
Too. So there are ways that Chaucer can also be something of a distant mirror for us. Part of the conflict of that century was with differing views of religion, all within the Catholic Church. The Reformation was still, while it was brewing, it was still a couple of centuries away. And at that time, well, one of the other things is, at that time, everybody was scared to death because of the Black Plague. And the fact that religious wars and wars for territory and power were rampant all throughout Europe, and including the British powers. And the Black Death killed up to a third or possibly up to a half in its entirety of the population of Europe.
And it came
Within
and
a few
went,
years.
and came and went.
It came and went, it kept coming in waves, and nobody knew that it was caused by fleas on rodents that came in on merchant ships.
And Chaucer survived 5 plagues.
And that always gives rise to a lot of superstition. That always gives rise to, and a lot of suspicion. Because when we have, and here's another characteristic of our age, and it happens within the church as well as within the world. And it's happening right now, quite frankly, in this whole controversy that enemies of Pope Francis are trying to dethrone him, if you will, because whenever there is a problem or a difficulty, our tendency is to solve that problem by finding a scapegoat.
Yes.
A scapegoat. And if you write or say the wrong thing to displease the wrong people, you may be blamed for these ills that are happening, and therefore everybody's going to be out to get you. And I think that's happening in our religious life, that's happening in our civil life so much today too. So I'd like to shift the focus here as to one of the things that has been under-reported, under-heralded, let's say, about your relationship with Chaucer is your exploration of his very specifically Catholic faith and Catholic identity. A faith that centers, surprisingly to many people, but clearly to you, centers on the Eucharist and the Eucharistic presence of Jesus Christ in the host. Now, that is something that does not speak to, I would say, the majority of people who claim to be Christians, because most of Christian faith is either not Eucharistic or has the Eucharist somewhere. Jesus, we celebrate the Lord's Supper, once a month or once a year or something like that, and it's sort of over and done with. But it's only the Catholics really, and the Orthodox, that take the Eucharistic presence, the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, seriously and really, as Christians did for 1,500 years. And so the Eucharist was, in one way or another, always the center of our faith.
Yes.
And it's clearly, in the Canterbury Tales, you maintain, the center of what Geoffrey Chaucer is communicating, particularly through allegory. So, how would you continue that thought?
Well, I have a number of Catholic friends, or just maybe even the Christians in the writers group I've attended. They say it's self-evident that Christ is leading the pilgrims. I mean, that's the way it was. But the fact that I see Christ in the host means that Geoffrey Chaucer is saying, I believe in the real presence. So this is a very, that people don't get that because the standard opinion about the host is he's just a blowhard and a buffoon, and when he gives people orders and when he scolds them and whatever, he's just being a big shot and throwing his position around. No, he's being God. So that makes the whole difference in what I see in the Canterbury Tales compared to what they're taken to be now. So,
part of your research was a very enlightening book that I just had to get a copy of too. Mary Rubin.
Yes.
Corpus Christi, right? Was that the name of it?
Say it again.
Corpus Christi? Or, anyway, it's about the medieval theology and practice of the Eucharist, particularly the development of the Feast of Corpus Christi and the formulation of the doctrine of transubstantiation, and actually how that lived out in people's faith and practice.
She is the authority, and she's a Jewish woman, which you can't say, well, she's got this thing she's trying to sell for her own reasons. No. And one thing she says, you can't overestimate the position, the power of the Eucharist in the Middle Ages. It was everywhere, and everyone thought of it, and yes.
And the primary Eucharistic devotion tended not so much to be the Mass, but to be the Corpus Christi procession.
Yes.
And it just sort of dawned on me that, well, the Corpus Christi procession is a pilgrimage under the leadership of the host being elevated.
Right. Yes.
So, you know, and that would have been part of Chaucer's regular experience as a Catholic.
And they leave a church, go out, and go back to the same place, which is what he's saying they're going to do in their pilgrimage. That they're going to return to the same post, he says, at the end of the pilgrimage.
So maybe it would be well for Catholic scholarship and even Catholic popular writing to pay a little closer attention to Chaucer in his original, not just language, but in his original milieu, to see again what kind of light the medievalist Chaucer has to shed on Catholics who are now living in times that are in some ways distressingly similar to Chaucer.
And another thing about the 1300s, many people believed the world would end in 1400.
And Chaucer's world did. Personally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the year he died.
They tell us.
They tell us. That's right. The only evidence we have was a rental certificate from Westminster Abbey 6 months before, and that's the last thing that's ever heard of from him, right?
Yeah, no word in between, and he's dead.
Yeah.
That's why the investigation was done by the Monty Python person.
Yeah. Sounds like what might be happening in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul.
Yeah.
Again, what goes around comes around, for God's sake.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, there is another thing that I think our Catholic, particularly our Catholic readers and listeners and interested people, may have a question about. And the one book of yours, quite frankly, that I have not gotten fully into yet is the big one on the Pilgrims. I'm going to, but not today. But, you know, the direction that you have discovered here is that the Pilgrims are, to a person, representing heavenly bodies, the signs of the zodiac and the planets. And you unfold that a great deal in your, that's why your subtitle of Chaucer's Pilgrims is the allegory.
And I want to make sure that you understand, I didn't research this. I didn't go after each pilgrim, whatever. the idea that the Pilgrims had a second identity, and what that identity was suddenly in my head. It bothered me so much. Why this random, is it just a random group of people? And my professor said that's the way it was in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Okay. But it just kept nagging at me, and shortly after, certainly not more than a couple of weeks, the idea fell into my head, and I knew who they were.
Yeah. And that's why you have never really found a welcome in the halls of academia.
Yes.
But perhaps a generation hence, researchers into Dolores Cullen may very well be extremely academically oriented.
Yes,
but
yes.
You'll be looking
You're
down.
not the first to say that.
You'll be looking down from heaven at that. Can you make a connection between the character of these pilgrims as signs of the zodiac and heavenly bodies with an astrological significance? And you make the point that, which everybody should know also. We see a big distinction between astrology and astronomy, a superstition and a science. The medieval mind basically did not make that distinction and could not make that distinction because it was so very much a part of the inherited culture, basically since there has been culture. The relationship of heavenly bodies to earthly events. And therefore, in some way, when you're dealing with God's order of things, even as a Catholic within the Catholic Church, those heavenly bodies still have some kind of a relevance. I'm reminded not only that many medieval cathedrals have signs of the zodiac all over them, in the stained glass windows, in mosaics in the floors, but even going back to the excavations of the Jewish synagogues, particularly in the Hellenistic era, which is around the time of Jesus. They are unearthing these magnificent mosaics, which of course had a Greco-Roman origin, but magnificent mosaics on synagogue floors featuring signs of the zodiac. And so it was part and parcel of our faith life in that Judeo-Christian tradition, as well as our worship life. Can you comment on how those connections actually played out in the medieval mind, and perhaps what relevance that has today?
Well, let's stay back there for a minute while I'm holding on to my thought. There was a problem I had with the cook, and the 5 men that he travels with. And I got to this point and I thought, no, what Chaucer says there doesn't make any sense at all until I looked at all kinds of pictures of cathedrals. And around the doorway of a cathedral are the zodiac signs. And the cook was illustrated differently, and that was the answer I needed, because he has more than 2 ways you can see him. I won't say more than that. Okay. And the thing that just fascinates me, now the host, I don't think it's giving anything away, is the Son, Christ, the Son, okay? And the zodiac follows the line of the sun. So this is what Chaucer is portraying.
And we're talking observation,
yes.
not Copernican
right.
Astrophysics.
Right.
But yeah. So the path of the sun is the path of the zodiac through the
yes.
through the sky.
Yeah. So, what does it mean today? I don't know.
I'd like to propose one way of thinking about it, see what you think. We have actually tended to lose an awareness and appreciation for metaphor as conveying a deeper truth. In other words, what we tend to do so very often is to see metaphor and figures of speech and symbol as ways of not being real. It's not real, it's only symbolic. You know, that's
Yes.
what we hear all the time. And I think the mentality of the past, up until perhaps the so-called Enlightenment, and in some ways it was, but the separation really of the material and the spiritual, the separation sometimes of fact and meaning, up until the modern era, symbol was seen and metaphor were seen as ways of being more real than you could otherwise describe. And to me, that's the heart of sacramental theology. You know, we talk about the sacrament, even the Eucharist, is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. Okay? We cannot let go of the sign even when we're talking about the Eucharist. So, is the Eucharist, for example, a symbol? Yes, the Eucharist is a symbol, but it is a symbol that brings forth the deeper reality of the real presence of Christ. So, I think that in looking to the relationship of the heavenly bodies, the sun, the moon, the planets, with the zodiac, for example, that may tell us something in the meaning that we give it, the metaphorical meaning about human life and human nature. I don't think we would necessarily say that we look to those heavenly events to predict earthly events. But perhaps we have embodied in our historical way of looking at these 12 monthly symbols, something of the deeper realities of human nature that we need to continue to keep before our minds. Now, I'm just winging it and saying that. I'm thinking there may be something to this, but it sort of whets my appetite to go a little bit further and a little bit deeper. Have you enjoyed our 49 minutes?
Yes.
Good. I have too. And I hope you who are still with us have enjoyed it also, and maybe might be interested in looking online for these. I will have right at the bottom here the websites that you can go to find them. And do you have any parting words of wisdom for whoever may be looking at this video?
Okay, I'm going to bring it up.
Okay.
I haven't been working diligently like I had up until maybe a year and a half ago, where I would wake up thinking about Chaucer first thing every morning. Okay, so somebody said, well, maybe your job is finished. Okay. Well, the other morning, as I'm waking up, the idea came to me that I've written a paper, fun paper. It's a dream sequence, really, kind of patterned after what Chaucer has done. Make a perfect picture book. And I'm going to pursue that because it just sounds like such fun to me, and I think people would enjoy it.
So you're looking for an illustrator.
A writer-illustrator.
A writer-illustrator, somebody whom the sparks that you still have left might be able to kindle a little fire in.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I have to be there to modify what is in the paper to the pictures, but I can see it already. It's wonderful. And it's not for little children, but it's not naughty. It's just for grown-ups, that's all.
Okay. So, are there any illustrators who are watching?
Yes. You have my website?
Yeah. You can get in touch with either of us.
My email.
Your email is
Celebrate
Chaucer.
No,
No,
sorry.
that's a website.
Right. Chaucer 600.
Chaucer 600.
AOL.com.
At AOL.com. Chaucer 600, because you set all of that up in preparation for the 600th anniversary of Chaucer's entry into purgatory that we're still trying to get him out.
Yes. I joined the internet in the year 2000, which was his 600th anniversary. And the man who was setting it up said, now this has to be unique. I said, don't worry, it's unique. The name.
Chaucer 600.
Yes.
At AOL.com.
Right.